Welcome back to the Exempt List. Today we're talking about just about all things Denver Broncos. They've decided to release Russell Wilson, taking on a massive $85 million dead cap hit. We have none other than Ryan McFadden of the Denver Post to break it all down, and we're going to get right into it. Welcome to the Exempt List, part of the Zero Blitz podcast family. I'm your host, Charles McDonald. Today, we have Ryan McFadden, Denver Post. Like I said before at the start of the show, the Broncos have decided to cut quarterback Russell Wilson, who they just gave like $4 billion to a couple of years ago. It's going to cost them down the road for the next 2 years. And I guess we'll have to see what happens and how this roster shapes up after that move gets made official, because they still have some moves to make to get cap compliant regardless. So it could be a messy offseason for Broncos fans and players that they've gotten to know to love over the past few years. But first, Ryan, my friend, we finally met in person for the first time at the Combine last week. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. I'll tell you this, Sean Payton and the Broncos keep you busy, especially at this time of the year.
No, I was about to ask you, I'm going to keep you in my thoughts, because when you cover a team and there's turmoil and things are getting overturned, it can get busy as hell for sure. Because I remember when I was covering the Giants was when they went from Pat Shurmur to Joe Judge, which kind of feels like I'm dating myself a little bit, because that was several years ago at this point. But still, you get caught up in, how things are changing. What's the quarterback going to look like? Who's going to be doing this and that? I mean, it's a busy time of year. So just take care of yourself, man. Just take it easy if you can. Find the spots where you can get some rest. But last week was your first Combine. So I want to ask you, what were some things that you took away from your first trip in Indianapolis?
I didn't realize that the diet for Indianapolis is literally steak, coffee, and alcohol. I felt like that's all I was consuming for a whole week. It's just like you work and then you just eat steak, and after you eat your steak, you just go out to like 3 a.m. and consume as much alcohol as possible. And then I remember the first time, like the night before the quarterback spoke, I said, all right, I'm not going to go out because I can't miss that. All right, that's why I'm here. And there's times where like I'll be on Instagram and there's like writers I follow and be like, I got check, and then timestamp at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, how do you guys are doing this? And then I see you guys right there at the podium. And then in the media workroom, like typing the story, like the type of endurance you have to have for that week, I think does not get talked about enough. And that's one thing I did not realize you needed going to Indy.
Oh, yeah. Because honestly, I remember the first time I went, I was like, what am I going to do? Like, because I got there the first few days before podium session started. And I was like, well, so what do you do before the podium session starts, before the workout starts? Like, oh, that's when you go network with people. I was like, network? Like where? And they're like, you got to go to High Velocity, the bar at the JW Marriott, or the steakhouse Prime 47. And I'm not even exaggerating. Like, if you go to Prime 47 at the right time, you can find almost any person in the NFL that you will possibly want to make a connection with, from coaches, general managers, scouts, lower level coaches, and front office personnel. I mean, everyone is over there at those two bars every day for basically an entire week. So yeah, the type of endurance you need is something. I remember when when I was covering the Giants, and there was some rumor potentially that in the Daniel Jones draft that they were thinking about taking a defensive tackle at 6. So I think Derek Brown, that was a Derek Brown draft where he ended up going to Carolina, but I was out until like 4 o'clock in the morning the night before, and Derek Brown's podium session was at 8:30 in the morning, and I somehow made it. Like, I made it. I'm like, but, I'm trying to ask him a question, and he's looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, you know what? Maybe I should get some sleep and reconfigure myself before I get things going. But it's a great week to meet people, see your old pals, make new friends. Like, there's a lot of good that comes along with the lack of sleep, I would say.
Yeah, most definitely. I'll tell you this. Like, I remember the night before the old offensive lineman spoke, I was out. I didn't get back to my place around 3 a.m. And when I tell you, I was at those podium sessions for the podium session for the offensive lineman struggling to stay awake. And then Joe Alt, the left tackle for Notre Dame, like didn't like his group of offensive linemen, they come out for like a 30-minute delay. I'm literally sitting on a chair like fighting to like keep both eyes open. But no, it's cool to like meet so many people in the industry, like so many coaches. I think the wildest thing is like you're walking, let's say you're walking out of Prime and you just see Mike McDaniel just sitting at the bar, like just talking. You kind of like do a double take, like what?
Yeah,
It's crazy.
Yeah. You kind of get desensitized to it as you go a few more times, and then next thing you know, they're searching you out to try to talk about stuff.
Yeah.
But let's move on from the combine and the late night escapades of the combine to talk about news from the weekend. Today is Tuesday. We're recording this podcast about noon Eastern time. The franchise tag deadline is in 4 hours. So I think we have a pretty safe assumption, barring any breaking news, any contract extensions over the next few hours, that we're going to get Brian Burns tagged by the Carolina Panthers. They couldn't agree to a contract negotiation over the season or after the season. But even with the 6 sacks he had last year, they're going to decide that he is too important of a player for them to let walk. And when you're the Carolina Panthers, I don't think there's anything wrong with keeping one of your few blue chip players in town. It seems like all signs are pointing to Josh Allen from the Jaguars also getting a franchise tag, which is a little interesting. I want to circle back to that one. And then the last bit of news is Saquon Barkley and I think Josh Jacobs are both slated to hit free agency, which is kind of continuing the running back conversations that we were having this time last year as far as what their market looks like and what is possible for them as they try to just cut out their little slice of pie in the big, NFL cap space world. So the Broncos don't have any franchise tag candidates, do they?
No.
I don't think they could afford it either way if they wanted to. Like that's kind of what happened with the Dolphins and Christian Wilkins, where Christian Wilkins is not going to get hit with the franchise tag. He's going to hit free agency. He's going to make a boatload of money, as we love to see, because I think there's an easy way to suppress these guys' salaries when you draft them and lock them into a contract that you can franchise tag them and not really let them hit the open market in a way and get teams bidding over them. But people are asking, well, why didn't the Dolphins franchise Christian Wilkins? Because they're $30 million over the cap. Like they literally cannot afford to bring him back in any sort of manner right now. So you unfortunately have to let them walk. I imagine the Broncos are in the same ballpark, right?
Oh yeah, in terms of the salary cap situation, they're really in a tough situation in terms of, and that's what makes this Russell Wilson thing even worse, because you're gonna owe him $85 million in the dead cap with his release, but they're gonna split it. You can split up in 2 ways. So you're gonna take the larger sum of that cap hit this year, which is $53 million in 2024, 32 in 2025, or other way around, you could do like 35.4 in 2024 and then the 49.6 in 2025. But like, no matter what direction you're going to go, it's hard. And that's what makes it like someone like Lloyd Cushenberry, a center, like they want him back. They love him. But at the same time, will you be able to afford him, especially what's going on? It's going to be very tough, because when you look at the whole roster, there's so many holes on this team. And at the same time, it's like, there's potential cap casualties. So guys like Courtland Sutton, Justin Simmons, Garrett Bowles, they can part ways with those guys to try to help that cap number down. But when you part ways with those guys, you still got to fill those spots. So if simply put, the Broncos, I look at the next few years, they are in purgatory, and maybe worse than that.
I would say purgatory seems kind of friendly for where we're about to go. But we'll get to that in a minute. First, I want to circle back to just where the Jaguars are. I'm not sure like how much attention you paid to like where the Jaguars are in terms of like the Josh Allen, Calvin Ridley conundrum, but by all intents and purposes, they haven't even really attempted to negotiate a contract with Josh Allen up until very recently. And I think that that's going to force them to franchise tag Josh Allen and allow Calvin Ridley to hit the open market, which is like, wow, you just traded a 3rd round pick for like a 1-year rental, or are you doing this to try and subvert like some of the stipulations you had on the trade with the Falcons, where if he gets a long-term deal with the Broncos or with the Jaguars, then they owe him a 2nd round pick instead. I kind of feel like they've overthought this to the point, or been inactive to the point where now, if I need a receiver in free agency, I would call Calvin Ridley. And if I'm Calvin Ridley, I'm going to listen to any offer that someone has to throw at me. He's almost 30, and there's only so much more time that you can collect these big time NFL deals. I always think it's funny when teams kind of mismanage themselves to the point where any person who just like remotely pays attention to the sport can figure out, oh, you probably should have maybe signed Josh Allen in season, and then you have some flexibility on timing on what you want to do with Calvin Ridley. But now we're just a few hours away from the franchise tag deadline, and they don't have either situation resolved. And now you're kind of maxed out cap wise, and you didn't even make the playoffs last year. I don't really understand how this happens, but I still feel certain sometimes that I could be a general manager of an NFL team. I think I still could.
Man, sometimes I look at teams around the league and you see the different moves and how they negotiate deals, and you're like, man, I think I could have done a better job. I'm just kidding. But yeah, Jacksonville is that is an interesting situation where you're about to franchise Josh, and then you're letting one of your top wideouts hit the open market. And like you said, if I'm Calvin Ridley, I'm going to answer as many phone calls as possible, because
right.
He's going to have a market. He's a very talented receiver. Like in his first year, he surpassed over 1,000 receiving yards with Jacksonville. So yeah, he's going to have a really strong market. I'm looking forward to see how that whole thing unfolds in Jacksonville.
I think the more interesting franchise tag talk will come maybe a little over the next few days when we get confirmation and we start hearing like the tea leaves on who was negotiating with who in the back room at Prime at 4:00 in the morning. But this cap hit, I feel like not everyone who follows the league, or maybe if you follow it in a more casual manner, you don't quite understand like how big of a deal it is to eat $85 million in dead cap for not even just like a single player move, but like that's a significant portion of your cap space. So this year's cap is was around $255 million. That was the reported increase in terms of where it jumped from around 222 last year to about 255 this year. So if you're going to say that $85 million, I can't use that to sign other players, I can't use that to extend my own players, that's a really, really significant problem. So let's just figure out how we got here, right? The whole Russ era in Denver. What led to us getting to this point? Because there's still a lot of time left on this contract. There's still a lot of years left on this contract. There's still a lot of money left on this contract. What? First of all, I think why they decided to trade for Russ is fairly obvious, right? They needed a quarterback. And at the time, I think you convinced yourself that Russell Wilson was not a terrible idea for them to go for. It ended up being pretty bad, but at the time, what were some of the factors, in your opinion, that went into their trade for Russell and also like selecting Russell as their quarterback instead of going elsewhere?
If you want to ask about like how we got to this point where Russell's no longer the Bronco and the Broncos are in the salary cap hell, I think it goes with Sean Payton. And I wouldn't say it's in a bad way. It's just that Sean Payton came to Denver and Russ wasn't his guy. And one thing, if you when you look at Sean Payton wants things to do his way. If you don't fit what he's trying to do, there's a good chance he's going to, say, hey, hit the door, goodbye. I'm going to bring someone in that does what I want to do and fits what I wanted to try to do. So I think that's where it starts. When you look back at it, I understand why the Broncos, this is going to go down as like one of the worst deals in terms from contract and trades in NFL history. And there's no reason for, and it's perfectly understandable. And at the same time, when you look at the But when you look back when they made it, you understand why. Like you said, they needed a quarterback. This franchise has been desperate for one since Peyton Manning walked out the door and retired. So getting Russell Wilson, a veteran quarterback, one has success throughout his career, is consistent, won a Super Bowl. Boom, that sounds like the perfect guy to bring in. But it was clear when Sean Payton came in, yeah, Russell Wilson numbers improved, but it was just the chemistry wasn't there. It just wasn't there. You could tell Sean Payton knew the chemistry wasn't there. Not saying Russ can't play in the NFL. I still think he can. But in Denver with Sean Payton, that whole relationship, I don't think was going well. Sean Payton has talked about how he had to trim down his playbook for Russ, talked about his getting in and out of the huddle. He had issues with that. Goal-to-goal situations. Like there's and that's one thing about Sean Payton. He's going to nick and pick the little things. It's the little things that will set him off. And that's who he is. He comes off as a perfectionist. He wants to win badly and he wants to win his way and win the right way. So it could be the littlest things where it just says, all right, this is not working. At the end of the day, when you look at it, yeah, the Broncos are going to take this significant cap hit. But I think it's clear that Payton said, all right, we're going to take the significant cap hit. But at the same time, I can't see myself working with him for the next 5 years. He's here. And so his mind well just like, part ways, deal with this now, and let me bring in my guy. So do I think Russell Wilson's going to have a market? Yes. But now I think this whole quarterback search is going to put a lot of pressure on the organization, ownership to get it, and Sean Payton himself to get it right. Because you really just came out and said, hey, yeah, this guy had a solid year, and he was in the middle of the pack in terms of the quarterbacks in the league. But we still don't think he's right for me and right for this team. We're going to move on and just eat up all this money. So, yeah, it's pressure on him to get this right, whether you're doing it in a free agency, whether you figure out a way to make a trade or drafting someone. No matter what they do, at the end of the day, the pressure is on the Broncos to figure this out.
Yeah, and they spend a lot of resources to be here. You trade 2 firsts for Russ, you trade away Bradley Chubb, you flip that for Sean Payton, and now what do you have? You have nothing. Or not. You have less than nothing. You're paid money to make this go away because you had this season where it's not even like the worst that it could have gone. I know it started off really poorly. You lose 70-20 to the Dolphins and things feel like a mess. But by the end of the season, I know you have a long shot in that playoff, or not the playoff game, but the game where they benched Russ. You start Stidham. I know it's a long shot, but you still have a chance to make the playoffs with like 2-3 weeks left to go in the season. This is not worst case scenario by any stretch. And it's also not uncharted territory for Sean Payton. Like this is that's kind of where he spent the last portion of his tenure with the Saints. So I don't know. Like to me, it just, from the outside looking in, I think it's very obvious that Sean does not want Russell Wilson to be his quarterback. And not only that, is willing to go through fairly extreme lengths to make sure that Russell Wilson is not his quarterback, is willing to blow up the entire team, basically, to make sure that Russell Wilson is not his quarterback. And I think that that's baffling. And I don't really know how much is out there about like their specific relationship, but when you ask someone to take like, the injury guarantees out of their contract or however that situation went before the season's even over, like, and at the end of the day, like that was an empty threat because you still put him back in the starting lineup. So, I think that says a lot about where they were. And what was your impression of the injury guarantee situation that happened this year that caused Russell to come out and do something he never, ever really does and come out and speak against the team that he's currently playing for?
I would say this. I'm not surprised that they approached him about it. I think it's just the manner how it went by it. You knew at some point they were going to have a discussion with Russ about his contract because you can tell this team said, oh, like we screwed up. We got to figure out a way to fix this to some degree. So them approaching Russ about that, it's not too shocking. The whole idea of like they did it after they came off their biggest win of the year, and then they I believe it was like a 16-game losing streak to the Chiefs. And then you say, hey, can you help us out a little bit? That's the part where I was like, oh, this is kind of, that's different. And the fact that, like you said, Russ spoke about it, out of all the, like, throughout this whole season, it was kind of like trying to get a sense, all right, who Russell Wilson is, who is this guy is as a person. He doesn't do a lot of talking. Like, he does his usual media, but like to see him like that was like completely different. I'm like, oh, this is kind of crazy right now. This is what's going on. But no, that's the part that was kind of surprising me. It's where you kind of knew whether it was going to be, let's say, they're going to ride out this whole year, then the offseason that comes out that they try to talk about that injury guarantee. But how it happened at that time of the year when this team is, like, you just beat the Chiefs, you go out and say you're confident in this team, you're confident in the quarterback in terms of turning the ship around and making a run, which they did. They won 5 in a row. They got to a game above 500, and then they fell apart in December. But yeah, that was the part that was surprising. Just how the whole thing went, how the whole thing unfolded in terms of the injury guarantee, how the benching, all of that was like, could it have been done better? Like, could this whole situation done better where you don't have this type of tension, where you don't have people thinking Sean Payton is a villain and all this stuff, all this other stuff? Yes, I think that the way that Broncos handled it as a whole, I thought could have been a lot better and could have avoided a lot of like the outside noise that they received from it.
They're right. I just pulled up the Spotrac, how they figure out the trades and release and what happens when and where. So the only way that this can really work, and what I'm assuming is what they did, is they designate this as a post-June 1st release, because they're at least the cap savings, you stay neutral on the cap savings in terms of cutting him, because if you cut him basically any time before June 1st, you're down another, let's call it $40 million or $50 million on your cap space if you just cut him. Or if you cut them after March 17th, you're down, 71 plus a $107 million dead cap hit based on the amount of money that is owed. So you post June 1st it, $0 in cap savings, but you're not losing anymore. But where you lose actually is the dead cap, $35.4 million in 2024 and $49.6 million in 2025. I would hate to be a GM in these circumstances. I would absolutely hate to be a GM in these circumstances because you're not giving me anything to work with, right? We are already in cap hell before this. Now we have less money to maneuver with once this is over. And now we still have to put a team together. So this is a question from @WhackHumanBeing. You should think a little bit higher of yourself, by the way. I get not doing it now during the pre-draft process, but what, if anything, was the argument for not firing George Paton after the season? Because it seems like he's not in control anymore from the outside.
So I think the thing is this. One of the things we did look at, like, one of the things I was watching out for was, would they make a GM move? But I think the Broncos ownership, they like George Paton. I think Sean Payton likes him. Sean Payton seems like he has a good relationship with him. And where it is like this, I think ownership wants to see, all right, how do these two work for full offseason? Last year, they were going through that process of Sean Payton coming in, hiring his staff. So now it's like you have the whole year with these two guys. You're going to let them go through free agents, like the whole process together, and see what one full year does. Do I think he can possibly be on the hot seat no matter what? Yes, I do. Just given how the Russ situation unfolded, you got to remember the Randy Gregory deal, a lot of other deals under George Paton that they're very questionable. So I can see why a lot of fans are wondering why he's still here. But I think ownership seems to really like George. Sean seemed to really like him. And I think they want to see, all right, what do these two can do together now that, Sean Payton's been in the building for a year now.
Yeah, I don't know what they could do together. Not much this year. I mean, I feel like, if you're George Paton, I'm like, well, I'm collecting checks for at least for another season, and we'll see what happens next. But you kind of have to nail the draft that comes up, and we'll get to that in a minute. But last thing before we throw it to an ad break, like when you have a season like this, where like we said, it wasn't even the worst case scenario, and we've seen players, like Jerry Jeudy and I think Cortland Sutton at other times come on social media to the defense of Russell Wilson. So do you think that Russ ever lost the locker room? Like, did that play a role here, or is it just Sean saying, no, I need my own guy. I didn't come here thinking I was going to be tied to this version of Russell Wilson. I thought I was going to be getting something a little bit better. How much of did the locker room role play here for Russell Wilson?
To me, I think this is more Sean Payton more than anything. I think this is really, it just comes off as just, this is more of like, the players when it happened, the players were shocked, but at the end of the day, they understand it's the business. It's the NFL, and stuff like this can't happen, even how crazy it does sound. But I think this is more, like you said, this is more to me, Sean Payton saying, I try my best to work with this guy. It's not clicking, and I'd rather move on now than trying to figure it out over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years or whatever, That's to me, that's what it looks like. Where he knows. Now we can look back at this down years later and say, man, Sean Payton really screwed this up. This team really screwed how this unfolded. But I think at the present moment, I think Sean Payton looked at this like, I can't see myself working with Russell Wilson, even though he was solid, but working with Russell Wilson for the foreseeable future. And let's just cut ties now and letting it drag on. So I think that's where this team is at. To me, even though they did part ways, they're still going to be like, these next 2 years are going to be tough. And especially this year, when you look at the cap numbers, they can't sign any marquee guys. They can't spend as much money as they did last year, like when they signed McGlinchey, Powers, and Zach Allen in free agency. They're not in the luxury to do that. And they're at the same time, they're going to probably have to make some tough decisions with some of these roster guys. Do you trade Jerry Jeudy to get additional draft pick? Do you move on for Garrett Bowles, even though he had a pretty modest season? Do you move on for Cortland Sutton or Justin Simmons? So to me, I think it's not going to be pretty. I'll say that. What's going to happen? It's not going to be pretty, because there's going to be some fan favorites that they're going to probably have to look at like, man, like, we like you here, but due to our situation, we have to part ways.
Right. So just for people who are curious, I'm looking at Spot Check right now, and it has the Broncos with minus $27 million in cap space. So, like, you have to start chopping, and the problem is, you're in the spot where teams know you have to get rid of players to become cap compliant. So, if let's say I'm a team that needs a left tackle, right? I'm interested in Garrett Bowles. I can look at your contract situation and realize, oh, you basically need to get rid of Garrett Bowles because you can free up $16 million in cap space. Why would I trade you anything premium? I know you're going to cut him regardless. I know you're in a position where you have to get rid of him. So all you're going to get is lowball offers, and that's kind of where you end up starting to rebuild by crashing back down to the bottom. You're going to sell off some veterans for maybe prices you could have gotten better a few years ago, and that's just the decision that they have made to be in this situation. We're going to be right back with the rest of this Broncos talk that I find pretty interesting after a quick word from our sponsors. All right, we're back. We're going to talk about what's next for the Broncos. We talked a lot about Russell Wilson and how you get here. We know it's a humongous $85 million dead cap charge that they're going to spend over the next few seasons. We know that they already don't have a lot of cap space now. They actually don't have any cap space. And then they have to figure out how to get cap compliant as they decide to cut Russell Wilson and deal with this massive dead cap charge. So it's going to be selling season for the Broncos. Let me ask you this. What team does Sean Payton have in mind when he says, okay, we're about to hit a reset. We're going to start building this into the future. Do you have any inclination on what he wants his team to look like?
When you look at this team, one thing is certain is this. When we look on the defensive side of the ball, Pat Surtain is the guy. I can't see them parting ways with him. Sean Payton loves the guy, and he's one of your – it's a guy I feel like they're going to try to build the defense around moving forward, especially given his age, and he's one of the top corners in the league. Offensively, I think when it comes down to how that the offense is going to look like moving forward, I think it's going to depends on what they do with the quarterback situation. Obviously, Sean Payton's a guy who's mentioned about being a run-heavy guy, relying on the run game. We saw bits of it. We saw bits of it during the season. We saw like when the games to me where they did look good offensively, you saw how the run game played a huge impact in that. So I think that's going to be bread and butter. Is using the run game heavily, mixing a play and those play action passes. A lot of things they try to do with Russ, it just didn't work out. But it's got, to me, whatever the way this offense kind of formulates is going to depend on who's under center, and that right there is uncertain. That's the one thing I would say this, where like you look at certain teams that are in that rebuilding phase or at the bottom tier of like roster construction. Like you kind of know, let's say it's the Chicago Bears, you know they're going to draft Caleb Williams. Like it's kind of like that. You kind of get that sense that they're going to draft Caleb Williams, and if they don't, they're sticking with Justin Fields. But you kind of have that idea where like Caleb Williams is probably going to be that guy moving forward. Denver, I can't tell. I think they can go different directions. I can see a rookie quarterback. I can see them taking another veteran and maybe can get a quarterback later on down the road. Or try to trade. It's just so many directions. Like it's this team has a lot of unknowns right now. It really does. And it's hard to understand, like, all right, Sean Payton speaks so much on having a vision. I have this vision for the offense. I have a vision for this guy. But to me, I think that vision is currently clouded because you just don't know what's the plan is for the most important position on the team.
That's a big part of the equation, right? What do you want this team to look like? Who do you want under center? What type of quarterback do you want? Because when he was with the Saints, they had big offensive linemen. They invested in running backs. They invested in tight ends. Drew Brees helps, but clearly Sean, he wants to be like a physical team that can run the ball. I just think about some of the investment they've made, and some of the development of guys they had in the offensive line over the years when he was there, like Carl Nix, Jari Evans, Teron Armstead, Max Unger was the center there for a while. Ryan Ramczyk is still there, one of the best tackles in the league. Like they have been absolutely loaded up front when Sean has had his best teams. It's not going to be like that this year. And quite frankly, I think I don't even think it's hating to say this. I think with the business of the NFL, to me, it's questionable that Sean Payton gets remotely close to seeing this rebuild all the way through, just for how long it can take for you to get off the ground with the 2024 season. But even beyond like the Broncos and the things that they have to figure out for themselves is, bro, you got Michael Jordan in your division. Okay. And I know that I know the Broncos beat the Chiefs last year one time. Or did they beat them twice? Once. It was once?
It was once.
Once they beat them one time, right? Okay. That's nice. I would be stunned if they beat the Chiefs this year. But ultimately, like that's who you're chasing within your division. Because every year the Chiefs have them under center. They're going to win a whole bunch of the games. They're going to be tough to fight, just year after year after year because they've got a good program going on there right now. It just seems very daunting to me, like the idea of starting over from zero with Patrick Mahomes in your own division. So the next question obviously is like, what do they actually do at quarterback for this season? Like, do you draft someone? Do you roll with JJ McCarthy? Because, the problem to me with drafting someone is it seems okay right now, but you have to think about what that roster is going to look like by the time the draft rolls around. It's going to be pretty thin. And I'm not sure that that's a situation that a rookie quarterback can survive in. I think there's arguments to be had about the theory behind like, well, if he's got the juice, then you should be able to see it even on a terrible team like this, or this team could be so bad that someone ends up ruining their own confidence, or they don't get to develop in a proper manner. What would you expect them to do at quarterback here? Like a rookie and a veteran, just a veteran minimum guys, a couple guys sitting back there, like, Jarrett Stidham, Brian Hoyer types. What are you thinking?
I look at it like this. No matter where they go, I would say this is where Sean Payton is going to have to look himself in the mirror and say, I'm going to have patience, because this is a guy who came in and says, if I don't make the playoffs, I'm going to be really disappointed. Well, you did make the playoffs. And now you're probably not going to make the playoffs for the next 2 years the way it's looking like. So, I think that's going to come. It's going to come down to, can he have the patience to wait and see this through? Right now, I don't know. But to answer your question about the quarterbacks, to me, I think the perfect scenario. I always said this was the perfect scenario. This was always the perfect scenario to me. You kept Russell Wilson for another year. Let's say you draft a quarterback, you let Russell ride it out 2024, maybe 2025, and then let your guy you just drafted, take over. Boom. Perfect scenario. Russell Wilson can keep you in games while you have a guy you can develop in the process. So that's not going to happen. I think there's two quarterbacks in mind that kind of fit what Sean Payton wants, like what Sean Payton wants to do in the offense. And I think that's Bo Nix and JJ McCarthy. It seems like JJ McCarthy might. If people are thinking JJ McCarthy is not going to be there at 12, I'm not the type of guy that thinks the Broncos should trade up, depending on what the deal is, because they've done too much. They've given up a lot. They've done too much trading and gotten
a lot of first round picks to be nothing.
So
right.
So that's where my concern is. If JJ McCarthy falls at 12 and they love him, I think that's the key. Then I can see them doing that. But let's say trade up to a few spots to get him. I don't know. It's like I think they can't keep affording to trade up, and it doesn't work again. So I look at it like this: if you could get one of those two guys, but then the key is like, all right, what does the roster look like around him? Who's going to be protecting one of those two quarterbacks? Who is he going to throw to? Is it going to be? That's where you're going to have to figure that out too. So I think if let's put in a scenario where they get McCarthy, right? If they got JJ McCarthy, I think he has the potential, but I won't try to rush him into being a week one starter. Like they seem to have some faith in Jarrett Stidham. So if you want to roll with that, or you got Jarrett Stidham, let him rock for a few games, and then move on. Depending on how the season's going, you move on with McCarthy and see how he looks. But if you're going, it's going to be the key thing is like Sean Payton's going to have to be patient with whoever he brings in with that development, especially if it's a rookie quarterback. But at the same time, I can see the Broncos going. A lot of fans like they would talk about like Baker Mayfield or like Kirk Cousins. I don't think they're not in that position to do that.
No, that's expensive, bro.
That's expensive. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like they're not in that position to do that. So I think to me it's like. I think that's the best route. You go draft a quarterback, and then you maybe let Stidham as your QB1 for half the season, and depends on how your rookie's looking, you make that switch. But either way, this is going to take some time because you don't want to rush JJ McCarthy out there or Bo Nix, Spencer Rattler, whoever they pick. You don't want to rush him out there, and the only person he's throwing and he doesn't have a tight end. You saw the Broncos' lack of production at the tight end position last year. And he doesn't have a consistent receiver core around him. You're just setting that guy up for failure in terms of his development. And that's, at the end of the day, Sean Payton's going to have to say, like, we're going to have to take the time on this. You get McCarthy, you're going to have to take your time. You just can't go in there and just assume, like, all right, we got the guy, now let's compete for a playoff. That's just one step. Getting a quarterback is just one step. You got a lot of issues on this team to figure it out and to put the right pieces around him. And that's what I said. Like, I like Bo Nix. I like J.J. McCarthy for what they can bring to Denver offense. But now it's up to them to, like, build around those guys. And that's just not going to be – that's not just going to happen in one offseason. That's, like, literally it's impossible right now for what they're going to do. And if they make any – if they do cut some guys, like I said earlier, let's say they move on for Garrett Bowles, who are you going to have at left tackle? That's where
you.
So you're going to make these salary cap. You're going to have some key guys be salary cap casualties. But then you got to figure out, all right, who steps in that role if we do? If we move on from Cortland Sutton, who's going to be that guy after him? So basically, no matter, like, at the moment, and I could be wrong. This team could just maybe a magic wand is just waved upon them and all their issues are fixed. But it's like no matter which way you go, this roster is just it's in trouble. And yeah, I'm all for if they like a guy to get a quarterback, I'm all for that. But at the same time, like, you do bring in a rookie quarterback, I wouldn't rush him into, all right, here we got McCarthy, boom, let's throw him out here week one, to see if he's the answer. No, I think you're gonna have him. You're gonna have to take your time. You're gonna have to build a talented roster around him. This is not just going to happen overnight. And I hope this organization I will assume this organization understands that. You hope this fan base understands that, because that's your best path. Your best path is getting a rookie quarterback, but at the same time, you want to make sure that if you do bring in this guy, that you don't screw up the process because you want to go out there and compete for the Chiefs in his first year. That's at the moment, that's not going to work. They don't have the roster for that.
Yeah. So I want to throw a hypothetical at you. My coworker and friend, Nate Tice, we are putting together a mock draft. I'm going to give you the sneak peek of the top 10, which we have kind of dubbed the F the Broncos mock draft. So we have Caleb Williams goes number 1 to the Bears. Drake May goes number 2 to the Commanders. The Vikings trade up to 5 with the Chargers for J.J. McCarthy. In this world also, we're following the tea leaves and saying Kirk Cousins is a Falcon. And the Raiders trade up to 8 with the Falcons to take Jaden Daniels. So you have Caleb Williams, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy, Jaden Daniels, all off the board in the first 8 picks of the draft. Where would the Broncos go from there? Would they just, with Sean Payton, just, blow up the whole office on live TV? Is that what would happen?
I think if your scenario plays out and Jaden Daniels goes to the Raiders and he's that close to being a Broncos option, I think Sean Payton's going to lose his mind. But I think if that scenario where, like, do you take Bo Nix at 12, or could you trade back, get more capital, and then take Bo Nix later in the draft? Now, will I take Bo Nix at 12? Probably not. Just if you're at 12. But, like, let's say you trade back, you get some picks, then
for 20s,
Yeah, I then boom, do it. If you put that together a mock draft and boom, you still like Bo Nix at 12, I was off. Like, I don't know. But if it's like you trade back maybe in the 20s, late teens, and you get Bo Nix and you add some more picks to your arsenal, boom. I think to me, that would probably be the next step for them. If they got a sense that Bo Nix will be available around there and they can do that, then yeah, that would probably be in that scenario right there. I think that would be the best for Denver, because I think he does have the qualities. Even NFL Network's Daniel Jeremiah mentioned that, how, like, Bo Nix has this quality in terms of processing and has that skill set to run Sean Payton's offense. So if you can trade, I think in that scenario, we're talking, you trade back, you select Bo Nix, and then you get more, you add more draft picks. I think to me, that's a win for Denver.
Yep. So last thing before we start moving on to just Russ's future, like I kind of alluded to earlier, but how long can the leash realistically be here on Sean? Because let's say you go 4-13 this year, which might be on the high end of what's possible. You go 4-13 this year, and let's say you go, 5-12 next year while you're still dealing with the dead cap hit spread over 2 seasons. Do you get to year 3 there? Because that would kind of be unprecedented in the current climate of the NFL that we're seeing right now. I mean, shoot, Arthur Smith had 3 straight seasons of 7-10, didn't get to year 4. We've seen other coaches fired fairly quickly after they get off to a rough start, like Joe Judge only lasted 2 seasons with the Giants. Adam Gase had a short run with the Jets. If they lose, like most people would project them to lose with the cap situation that they have, how long does the leash actually exist here?
Well, I think what's going to be taken into account is Denver's cap situation. So these
it's the most important part, right? It's the most important part of evaluating what they can do.
That right there is going to be taken into consideration. So maybe if you're talking we're year 3, so they get out the whole Russ thing after 2 years. So that'll be Payton's 4th year. So we're in Payton's 4th year. So I think by then your conversation will be had because I think it goes back to this. You go 8-9. So that's I think that's 3 wins better than it was the year before, off the top of my head. But you're like Payton's still one of the reasons why Russ, you're in this situation anyway with the whole Russ thing. Yeah, I think the year 4, I think if he gets to year 4 and the Broncos are still in that situation, then I think conversation will be had. But I think a lot of things the ownership is probably going to take into account is this whole situation and where you are rebuilding. You're necessarily trying to rebuild this roster, but they like Sean Payton. Oh, they love him. Oh my, yeah, they love him. They love his vision. I think they love his attitude more than anything. That winning culture and the players, yeah. And the players seem to like it as well in terms of like having, you're having a guy around you where like he's determined. He's like, I want to turn this around. And to me, I think he's going to have a longer leash than some might expect, unless it's like bad. Like I'm talking about like bad, where you're talking
like 2-15, 1-16.
Yeah, that's where it is. But to me, I think that's where it has to be for where the leash gets kind of a little shorter. But besides that, no, I think Payne, he got a lot of backing from ownership, and they really have faith in him and possibly turn this team around.
I think that's enough on the Broncos and how loser they're going to be. I don't know. I don't expect this to be good at all. But let's talk about Russ, because like you said, I even though I do think there's some merit to the idea, even with his play, that you might not want to do this anymore, I would still say Russ is one of the 32 best quarterbacks in football for sure. So where does he land? Like where? And well, first of all, let's start off with this. You watched him all season. What do you think he has left in the tank as far as like being an effective starter goes?
Honestly, I think he can be an effective starter. His situation was this: like over these 2 years, he had 2 different head coaches, 2 different play callers, and his first year, everyone like half the team was basically injured. And then this year, under Payton, even though they didn't really get along on the field, had that connection, he still threw for 26 touchdown passes, 8 interceptions. I still think he has a lot of tank. I think it's just about him going to this to the right situation. For agenda purposes, I need him to go to Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Just because they play Denver at home. So it's crazy. I think they play the Falcons too at home. I know they play the Falcons. They play the Falcons. So I think they play the Falcons at home this year. So it's like the teams that are kind of like could use him. They play the Broncos this year. So it'll be funny. Like I can see him going, because I know Russ is he has that winning mentality. I want to still win. I want to compete. So if we're in that scenario, I think Pittsburgh fits them best in terms of that. Where you go to, they were in the playoffs this year, and they had Mason Rudolph and Kenny Pickett as their quarterback. So I think you put Russ in this, and that's an upgrade for that organization. And if you get in the playoffs with those two guys, I'm pretty sure you can get into the playoffs with Russell Wilson. So I think he does have I think he still has left. I think he still got a couple years left in the tank. Is he the same guy we saw back in Seattle? No, but do I think he's still a quality starter in his league? Most definitely. He just wasn't a quality. He just wasn't what Sean Payton wanted. I think that's what people got to remember. It's not. I don't think it's a knock to his talent. I think it's more of this is the guy Sean that just couldn't work with Sean Payton. But I think you put him in a better situation. I think you can send. Like I said, I think Pittsburgh would probably be my. If I had to pick a team, I think I would like to see him go to Pittsburgh there because that does give him that opportunity to at least compete for the postseason. And boom, you know how crazy that would be? He comes back to Denver after getting cut. Oh man, that would be something.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I'm here for any chaos. I would say I don't really know how accurate this is, but it seems like it seems like Kirk Cousins is headed to Atlanta. I mean, I don't really see a reason why you would move from Minneapolis to Atlanta unless you planned on playing for the Falcons. And that was within your goal. And the Falcons, they have the cap situation to make that happen. And they have enough intriguing pieces on offense where I can see why Kirk would say to himself, I can change this and maybe be the guy that gets them back to the playoffs. The other quarterback moves that we are waiting to hear on is like Russell Wilson. Let's say, I think Steelers is a good fit for him. I still think Falcons is on the table for him. And really, when we start looking around the league, that it doesn't really seem like there's a whole lot of other landing spots I'll be interested in, veteran quarterback, unless maybe like Baker Mayfield signs somewhere else and then Tampa Bay becomes open because they're still a team that's trying to compete for the playoffs as we saw last year. I guess the only other really available quarterbacks would be Justin Fields, whose market, I think my biggest takeaway from the combine is the Justin Fields market is not that strong in terms of teams who want to trade for him or would be willing to trade for him and see what happens. And like Ryan Tannehill, am I forgetting any other names off the top of my head?
Baker, Ryan.
Yeah. Baker, Ryan, Kirk. Fields, Kirk. I think that's about it as far as the quarterbacks go.
Yeah.
I think the biggest, once we get one domino to fall, whether it's the Justin Fields trade or Kirk Cousins signing, in Atlanta or someone else, then we'll start to see where it goes. But I know one thing though, if I'm Russell Wilson, you can sign me for the vet minimum, bro, because that money's still coming my way regardless. And what do I care what happens with the Broncos now after how last season went? And like I said to someone before, I think there's merits to the idea of not wanting Russell as your quarterback anymore. But I think it's also pretty easy to disagree with the way that things have transpired, especially last season. So we'll see what happens there. Ryan, before let you out of here, let people know what you're working on and some things you have coming down the pipeline, or just where they can find you for general Broncos malfeasance over the next few months.
Yeah, you can follow my work at thedenverpost.com and follow me on Twitter at Ryan McFadden _. Feel free to, hit me up for any Broncos related questions. But yeah, that's where you can find my work. But yeah, after that is just, getting ready for the draft, free agency, and the biggest question in Denver: who is going to be the quarterback for the Denver Broncos in 2024? And why it could be Jarrett Stidham.
This is going to be a fun offseason for you to cover because there's a lot of movement for the Broncos and also not very much, because when you decide to cut Russell Wilson with this cap space situation, as we stated earlier in the podcast, there's only so many moves that you can actually make. I remember when Terry Fontenot got, we took over in Atlanta and Julio left and they still had Matt Ryan for the first year. You're like, all right, what can we do? They have no cap space. So your biggest signing is Cordell Patterson, Fabian Moreau, Other guys who didn't stick around. Eric Harris used to play for, the Raiders for a little bit. But the problem is when you move on from Russell Wilson, you have this move, people become more obsessed than they were before. They want to get this next quarterback thing right, because if you have the quarterback, you can compete. So I'm going to keep you in my thoughts over the next few months, because I feel like this is the kind of team that fans get really unhinged about when they can see things circling the drain, but you got to give yourself some hope. You only get 17 football games, every year. I only got 17 of these. You're telling me 15 of them are going to be bad? Maybe. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Exempt List. Jason Fitz and Jory Epstein will be back on Thursday with an episode of Inside Coverage. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Exempt List every Tuesday with more draft content leading up to the 2024 NFL Draft. I'm Charles McDonald. You can find me on Twitter at 4Verts. Ryan McFadden, my guest today. Like you said, you can find him on Twitter at Ryan McFadden _. Producer Stone behind the glass. You can find him on Twitter at SJ Rochelle. And we will see you next week.